Good morning, grade 9. How are you? I hope that all of you are doing fine. On week 12 of your module in math, we've talked about radicals. And today, we will discuss on how to simplify radical expression. The question is, how can we simplify radical expressions? We can simplify radical expressions using the multiplication and division property of radicals. Okay? And again, our lesson for today is simplifying radical expressions. Alright, so first is we go with the first property, which is the multiplication property of radicals. What is the multiplication property of radicals? If A and B represents non-negative real numbers, so we can say that the square root of AB is equivalent to the square root of A times the square root of B. So, parang ganito lang to. The square root of AB, kinuha lang natin yung factors ng radicand, which is AB, and we can split this two by getting the factors of the radicand. And the factors of AB are A and B. So, parang isa-separate lang natin sila with under a radical sign with both factors. Okay? So, the examples of this are the following. Number 1, the square root of 8. Okay, so I would like you to think if the square root of 8 is a perfect square. Do you think 8 is a perfect square? The answer is no. But we can factor 8, which the other factor is a perfect square. Okay, what are the factors of 8, which the other factor of the two factors is a perfect square? Alright? So I'll just write the example number 1 here on the whiteboard. Okay, so again, we need to factor 8, which the other factor is a perfect square. Okay, so first is um we begin with 4. Is 4 a perfect square? Yes. Alright? So 4 times 2, that is equivalent to. So the factors of 8, which the other factor is a perfect square, is 4. Is 4, yes. And the factors are 4 and 2. So pwede natin silang isulat sa ganitong form. 4 times 2. Alright? 4 times 2, 4 times 2, that is equivalent to 8. And now, since 4 is a perfect square, we can now get the square root of this. Or in short, ilalabas lang natin siya doon sa loob ng radical sign by getting the square root of 4. And what is the square root of 4? The answer is 2. Okay? So, since 2 here is not a perfect square, meaning to say 2 will remain inside the radical expression, radical sign. Okay? So that is 2. And how do we read this? 2 times the square root. Alright, so this is already the final answer for this. And number 2 is we have square root of 200. Again, 250 is not a perfect square. Pero, pwede natin i-factor yung 250 na yung isang factor sa factors ay perfect square. Okay? So, yung isang factor neto or the two factors of this are 25 times 10. Okay, why 25? Because 25 is a perfect square. Okay, and what is the square root of 25? That is 5. And 25 times 10, that is equivalent to 200. Again, in breaking down the factors, kailangan yung isang factor sa perfect square. Parang si 4 dito, perfect square siya. 25, perfect square siya. Okay? So, since 25 is a perfect square, pwede na naman natin siyang ilabas doon sa radical sign. Alright? So, the square root of this is 20. The square root of 25 is 5. Alright? And then, since 10 is not a perfect square, meaning to say, magre-remain ulit siya sa um, dito sa radical sign, sa loob ng radical sign. So, that is 10. Alright? So therefore, we can now say that the simplified form of 250 or the square root of 250 is equivalent to 5 times the square root of. Okay? So, do you have any question? If none, we can now proceed to number. Okay, so we go with number T. How do we read this? Number T. We can read this as negative 5 times the square root of 75. And then we write here on the whiteboard, negative 5 times the square root of 75. Okay? So again, 75 is not a perfect square. Pero pwede nating factor yung 75 na yung isang factor niya is a perfect square. And what is again is that? And still we write negative 5 here. Don't forget that. And then the factors of 75. Oh, man. Okay, so we go with example number 3. And how do we read this? Negative 5 times the square root of 75. And then we write here on the whiteboard. Okay? So same procedure. We factor 75 na yung isang factor is a perfect square. Okay, so before we do that, i-rewrite ulit natin si negative 5 dito. Huwag niyong kakalimutan yan. And then, we think of the factor of 75 na yung isang factor is a perfect square. And I think the one factor of this is same thing, 25 times 25 times 3. What's 25 times 3? That is 75. Okay, why 25? Because 25 is perfect square. Alright. So we write again, negative 5 here. And then, at this time, kukunin na natin yung square root ni 25. And the square root of 25 is equivalent. Okay, lalabas natin siya dito sa loob ng radical sign. And then, kapag nilabas na natin siya, okay, the square root of 25 will be multiplied to the number outside the radical sign, which is negative 5. Okay? So, the square root of 25 is 5. So, therefore, multiply lang natin siya dito kay negative 5. And then, the square root of, or the square, number 3 will remain inside the radical sign because it is not perfect square. Always take note of that. Kapag hindi na siya perfect square, yung isang factor, always magre-remain siya inside the radical. Ang ilalabas lang natin or kukunin natin yung roots is yung perfect square. Or it can be later on kapag 3 yung index dito, um, it is a perfect cube. Okay? So since there's an invisible 2 here, okay, which denotes the square root. Alright, so perfect square yung hinahanap nating mga numbers. Alright, so going on. So we simplify this. Negative 5 times 5, that is equivalent negative 20. Okay? This is already simplified. Pwede na natin siyang step. Okay, so how do we read this? Negative 25 times the square root of 3. Okay, so therefore, we can now say that the simplified form of negative 5 times the square root of 75 is negative 25 times square root of 3. Okay? So, ganun lang siya kadali. Okay. So, that's how we get or we apply the multiplication property of radicals on the whole numbers. Okay. So, what if we go with the variables? Okay, I repeat, what if we go with the variables? Okay, I'll just erase this and then we move on to the next examples. Okay, more examples. Okay, paano naman na kapag meron na yung mga variables? Okay, parehas lang din yung gagawin natin dito. We just simply apply the multiplication property for radicals. Wherein, if-factor natin yung variable na yung isang factor is a perfect square or pwede nating kunin yung roots. Okay? So, we go with example number 4. And our example number 4 is the ninth root of x. I know. Our example number 4 is the square root of x raised to the power of 9. Okay. So, ganito lang yan. In simplifying this, okay, so since the index here is 2, so we make sure that the factor of this, okay, is divisible by 2. Yung isang factor neto ay divisible by 2. So, we can say that the other factor, the factors of x raised to the power of 9, which the other factor is divisible by 2, are x raised to the power of 8 times x raised to the power of 1. Okay, why 8? Bakit 8 yung nilagay natin? Because 8, we can get the square root of x raised to the power of 8. And that is x raised to the power of 4. Okay, mamaya explain ko kung paano natin nakuha. Again, and x raised to the power of 8 times x raised to the power of 1 is just simply equal to this. So, parang pinactor lang natin, kinuha lang natin yung factors ng x raised to the power of 9, pero equal pa rin siya dito. Okay, dapat equal pa rin yung gano'n. Alright, para lang, ini-split lang natin sila. So, kapag sa Lego, para lang natin binabaklas yung Lego. So, same form pa rin siya. Same, equal pa rin yung ano niya, pero parang, what you call this? Parang binabaklas lang natin. Parang binabaklas lang. At parang kinakabit natin. Parang ganun yung concept na. Merong merong Lego house, okay, na binabaklas lang natin yung yung parts ng Lego house. Okay, pero parehas pa rin siya. Alright? So, in this is, we already can get the square root of x raised to the power. Sabi ko kanina, the square root of x raised to the power of 8 is x raised to the power of 4. Okay, bakit siya naging x raised to the power of 4? Ganito lang yan. Since yung index dito is meron siyang invisible na 2, we just divide the exponent here, which is 8 divided by 2, that is equivalent to 4. Okay, 8 divided by 2, that is equivalent to 4. And then, Since x is not a perfect square, x will remain inside the radical sign. Okay? And this is already the simplified form of this. Okay. Next class is we move on to number 5, which is the square root of 4 times x raised to the power of 3 times y raised to the power of 2 times z raised to the power of 6. So you can see, class, yung whiteboard is napalitan na ng green board. Alright, so um, we move on in solving this. So as you can see here, 4 is already a perfect square. So or a square number, should say. So hindi na natin siya kailangan factor. And x raised to the power of 3 is not a perfect square. Y raised to the power of 2 is a perfect square. Z raised to the power of 6 is a perfect square. So pwede na natin kunin yung roots ng mga. So, and then we move on to this. Ito lang yung ipapactor natin. Alright, so we move on. And then we write again. So 4, that's a perfect square. So magre-remain siya. And then x raised to the power of 3. Again, we need to factor this na yung isang factor is perfect square. So this is x raised to the power of 2. And then times x raised to the power of y. Alright, so see y raised to the power of 2, no need to factor this, and same thing with z raised to the power of 6. Okay? Because 2 is divisible by 2 and 6 is divisible by 2. Mayroong invisible po dito, as I mentioned a while ago. So that will remain y raised to the power of 2 and then z raised to the power of 6. Okay, so next is ilalabas na ngayon natin yung mga perfect square. Alright, which is 4. And what is the square root of 4? That's 2. Alright, what is the square root of x raised to the power of 2? X. And x here will remain. And what is the square root of y raised to the power of 2 here? That is y. And what is the square root of z raised to the power of 6? That is z raised to the power of 3. Okay, so ganito yung shortcut niyan. Bakit naging x raised to the power of 1 to? 2 divided by 2, 1. And y raised to the power of 2 here, 2 divided by 2, 1. Okay, merong 1 dito na invisible. Because any variable or any number that is a whole number, it's always raised to the power of 1. And that is positive. Positive. And here is we also have z raised to the power of 6. 6 divided by 2. Here, merong 2 dito. And that is equivalent to 3. Alright? So, again, x is the only variable that will remain inside the radical sign because it is not a perfect square. Okay, so therefore, this is already the simplified form of this. Alright, any question? Alright, so we move on to number 6. Again, we'll just write the problem here on the green board. So at this time, as you can see here, meron na siyang index na 3. Okay, so so how do we read that one? So we read that one as cube root. Okay? So kapag 3 cube root, if it is invisible, kapag walang nakalagay na number, it is automatically square root. At yung index nun is 2. Okay, if it is 4, so that is 4th root. If it is 5, we call it 5th root. If it is 6, we call it 6th root. Pero dito sa number 6, what we are trying to simplify is the 3rd root or the cube root of what? 8 times x raised to the power of 5 and then times y raised to the power of 3 and then z raised to the power of 12. Okay? So here is uh, what we will do here is to factor 8. Okay, this is my question. Is 8 um, a cube number? Yes, because the cube number the third root or the cube root of 8 is 2. Why 2? Because 2 times 2 times 2, that is raised to 2 raised to the power of 3. And 2 raised to the power of 3, that is equivalent to 8. So, buhay natin yan. Explain ko lang para maintindihan na. Okay? So, we move on. So, no need to factor for this. So, i-rewrite lang ulit natin siya. And 8. And the next is we go with the next variable, which is x raised to the power of 5. Again, we need to factor x raised to the power of 5, which is yung isang factor is a cube root or a perfect cube number. Okay, or a perfect cube variable, which is x raised to the power of 3, okay, times x raised to the power of 2. So, bakit naging ganun ulit? So, parang breakdown lang natin sa x raised to the power of 5, which is yung isang factor is a power of 3. Alright? So, that para makukuha natin yung may lalabas natin siya later on at ma-simplify natin. Okay, so we move on to next example, which is y raised to the power of 3. Okay, so hindi na natin siya kukunin ng or hindi na natin siya ipa-factor kasi note, ito yung andito, divisible by 3 naman siya. Or this is a cube variable. Okay, so next is j raised to the power of 12. Since 12 is divisible by 3, no need to factor for that. So, rewrite natin si 12. And then, we extract the cube number here. Alright? So, 8. What's the cube root of 8? As I mentioned a while ago. So, 8 is also in the form of 2 raised to the power of 3. Okay? 2 raised to the power of 3. And the cube root of 8 is simply 2. And then, we move on to the next, which is x raised to the power of 3. Again, 3 divided by 3. That is equivalent to 1. And that is x raised to the power of 1. No need to write for 1 here. And x raised to the power of 2 will remain inside. And y raised to the power of 3, again, pwede na natin siyang labas. So, 3 divided by 3, no need to write for 1 here. And next is we move here, z raised to the power of 12. Since 12 is divisible by 3, divide na lang natin siya. 12 divided by 3, that is z raised to the power of 4. Alright, so ano yung nag-remain dito? X raised to the power of 2 or x. Right. Okay, don't forget to write the cube here since this is a cube root of x raised to the power of 2. Okay, so how do we read this? 2 times x times y times z raised to the power of 4 times cube root of x raised to the power of 2. So this is already the simplified form of this. Okay? So I hope na nakuha natin itong first property, which is the multiplication property of patterns. Okay? So I'll just erase this and then we move on to the next example or the next property, which is so-called the division property for matrix. Okay? So we move on to the next property, which is the division. So here is the division property of radicals. It says here if A and B represent non-negative real numbers. Okay? So wherein A should be greater than or equal to 0. And B should be greater than 0. Okay? Kasi kapag yung b is equal to 0, hindi na siya pwede because any number that is multiplied by, any number that is divided by 0 is undefined. Lagi yung tatandaan. Yung b dapat greater than 0. And 1 or 1 or until to the positive infinity. Alright, so we move on to um, examples. Okay, so our example number 1 is the square root of 125 over 80. Okay, the square root of 125 over 80. Okay, before that, balikan muna. So, dito kanina, the square root of A and B. So, ang ginawa lang natin dito, parang break down lang natin yung numerator and then denominator wherein sineparate natin yung radicals or yung radical sign. Okay, so equal pa rin naman yung dalawa. So, the same property, okay, we will use this property in simplifying the following radical expressions. Okay, so we move on to number 1. I'll just rewrite this on our green board. Okay, so again, this is 125 over 81. Okay, I forgot to mention a while ago. So, bago natin i-break down tong part na to o i-separate si numerator at denominator, separate yung radical sign nila, we have to make sure first that the fraction form inside is already in simplified form. Okay, this is my question. Is 125 over 81 um pwede na natin siyang ang tawag dito or hindi na natin siya pwedeng i-simplify. So, I guess this is it. Pwede na to. So, we break down, okay, which is square root of 125 over square root of 81. Okay. So, the term here on the left side is just equal here on the right side. So, in-apply lang natin yung division property of radicals. Okay, and then we simplify this. Okay, so we move on first onto the numerator, which is square root of 125. Again, 125 is not a perfect square, right? Pero pwede nating i-factor si 125, which is yung other factor niya is a perfect square. Okay, and what are the factors of this? Na yung isa is a perfect square. That is 25 times 5 because 25 is a perfect square times multiplied by 5 that is equivalent to 100. So like okay, so 25 times 5. And then we move on to the denominator. Okay, square root of 81. 81 is already perfect square. No need to factor for that. Pwede na natin siyang kunin immediately yung square root niya. And the square root of 81 is equivalent to 9. Alright? So, let's simplify this. Okay. So, the simplified form of this is square root of 25. That is 5. And 5 will remain inside the radical sign because it is not a perfect square. Times 5 over the denominator, which is 9. Okay? So, tanong, is this term 5 times the square root of 5 divided by 9 is already simplified? Yes. Therefore, this is already the simplified form of this. So, do you have any question for that? If none, okay, so I guess we can already move to example number. Okay, I'll just erase this. Okay, so we move on to example number 2. And our example number 2 is square root of, okay, 72 y raised to the power of 7 over 25 x raised to the power of 2 and then y raised to the power. Okay, to simplify this, before natin sila i-break down, as I have said kanina, we make sure first that the terms here, okay, or the term here inside the radical is simplified. Okay, laging yun yung principle dun. Before natin i-separate yung kanilang radical sign, or bigyan natin ng radical sign dito, and then dito din sa denominator, we make sure first that this is in simplified form. Okay? So 72 and 25, this is already in simplified form. And x raised to the power of 2, this is already in simplified form. But take note of this. Y raised to the power of 7 and y raised to the power of 3. Okay, so this is not yet in simplified form. Okay, we can simplify this by applying, okay, the laws of exponent, which is the um quotient law. Okay, or quotient rule, I should say. The quotient rule. Okay? The quotient rule, if we're gonna apply this, is we just copy the the basis, which is y, and then we subtract the exponent, which is 7 minus 3. Okay, since larger si 7 at nandun siya sa numerator, dito na lang tayo magma-minus ng 3. So this will become, so I'll just rewrite this. Left part. Okay, 72y y raised to the power of 7 minus 3. Okay, that is equivalent to 4. Okay? By the way, this is 72 over 25 times x raised to the power of 2. Okay. So, si y raised to the power of 3, wala na siya. Kasi, sinubtract na natin yung exponent nandito sa taas. So, ibig sabihin, na-simplify na. Okay, to make it clear, ganito na lang. Cancel na natin yan. Tapos cancel natin yan. Gawin natin 4 dito. Tapos nire-write lang natin siya. Okay? So, again, as we simplify this, okay, breakdown muna natin siya. That is square root of 72 y raised to the power of 4, okay, over square root of 25 x raised to the power of 2. Okay, so simplify natin to. Okay, question 72. Is 72 all is a perfect square? No. So pwede pa naman nating i-factor si 72 na yung isang factor niya is perfect square. So the question is, ano yung isang factor ng 72 na yung isang factor is perfect square? So the answer is 36. Okay? 36 is a perfect square, and 36 times 2, that is equivalent to 7. Sulat natin. And then, don't forget to write over. Okay. And 25 is a perfect square. Okay, so pwede na natin kunin yung square number nito, which is 25.
And then x raised to the power of 2, the square root of this is x. Okay, so therefore the simplified form of this, square root of 25x squared is 5x. Okay? That is, by the way, this is 5x. 5x to. So hindi na nakita dito sa my camera. Alright, so the continuation of this and is to this in this part. Okay, and then we get the square root of 36, which is 6. Lalabas na ngayon natin siya. Okay, and then by the way, I forgot, um, y raised to the power of 4, or that is square number. So the square root of y raised to the power of 4 is y raised to the power of, again, 2 here is not a perfect square, so it will remain inside the radical. Okay, so over, again, copy this 5x. So therefore, we can now say that the simplified form of this term, or this radical expression, is this: y, 6 y squared times the square root of 2 over 5x. Okay, so I hope na nakuha natin itong part. Okay, to make it clear, i-rewrite na lang siya dun sa piece of paper or in your notebook in math. Alright, so again, we can now move on to the last example. Yes, last examples na tayo. And then after that, you can already answer your activities. Okay, I'll just erase this. Okay, example number 3 is the square root of x raised to the power of 5, okay, times y raised to the power of 2 over 16 xy. Again, so before we break down yung tung radical signs ng dalawang ito, ng numerator and denominator, so we make sure first that the terms inside the radical sign, okay, or the radicand, is already in simplified form. So the question is this term here inside the radical sign is already in simplified form? The answer is not yet, because there's an x here, dito may x din dito, may y term din dito, and then may y variable din dito. Then we can still simplify. Okay? So we write the square root sign, and then we simplify. Sulat natin. Okay, so for this is we just use again the quotient rule for the laws of exponents. Okay, so if we are dividing any number or any variable, okay, so all we have to do is to subtract their exponent. So this will be 5 minus 1. So ma-eliminate na yung x dito. Mawawala na. Yan. So isusulat na lang natin c. This will be eliminated. So magiging 4 yan. So hindi na nakita na. So this will become 4. So we write here 4. Okay, so y here will be 2 will become 1 kasi 1, 2 minus 1, that's equivalent to 1. So this already be cancelled. Alright? So y, yeah. And then 16 will remain on the denominator. Okay, so the simplified form of this is already this. And then we can already break down natin siya, or separate radical sign. X raised to the power of 4 times y over square root of 16. Okay? And then we can already simplify this. Okay. And then what is the square root of x raised to the power of 4? That is simply x raised to the power of 2. Okay, y will remain here because that's the perfect square. Okay, divided by square root of 16. And square root of 16 is perfect square or a square number. So the square root of 16 is equivalent. Okay, so therefore, this is already the final answer. Okay? So, I hope guys na nakuha natin itong two properties in simplifying radical expressions. Okay? So, ganun lang siya kadali. And I hope you can already answer your activities on week 14, okay, of our module 7. Alright? So, I want you to master this because later on, when we will move on the operations on radicals involving multiplication and divisions, okay, the two properties are very important, okay, in um, applying on the operations on radical expressions involving multiplication and division. Okay, so this is all for today, guys. I hope that you've understood our lesson for today. Thank you for watching and keep on smiling. Okay, so that's all for today, class. Goodbye to all of you. Shalom. Have a good day ahead.